The point of the Enneagram isn't, oh, these are my core motivators, so I'm going to do more of that. It
Mm-hmm.
is, these are my core motivators. This is why I'm stuck. So I need to
Yeah.
learn how to release myself from these fears and desires that are holding me in my place here. And the nice thing about the Enneagram is it has a very clear tool to do that.
Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast, where we discuss all things identity, self-compassion, and fulfillment within and beyond motherhood. I'm Emily Rose Hardy, a mindset and self-love coach for moms. I am a firm believer that to be able to take care of our children, we must take care of ourselves first. This is not a parenting podcast. No, this is a podcast where we will challenge the societal expectations of what it means to be a mom, demystify the perfect mom myth, and learn to love ourselves. You are worthy, mama. Let's do this. Hey, welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. It's Emily, and I am legitimately so excited for this conversation today. We are going to be digging into the Enneagram, and I am so fascinated by the Enneagram. I'm actually on my own personal journey to really learn to harness the power of this tool, both in my own life and in my practice. And today we have a guest joining us who is going to share her expertise and experience with the Enneagram. And I'm just so excited for this conversation. This is something I love to talk about. So let me introduce you to Chelsie. Chelsie Engle is a certified Enneagram coach specializing in types 2, 7, and 9. She is dedicated to helping clients discover why they feel stuck, learn how to release, and live more present and connected. After an 11-year career in education, Chelsie courageously transitioned into full-time coaching, allowing her to pursue her passion while raising her young children in Iowa with her supportive husband. Through her engaging keynote speeches, Chelsie shares practical tools and strategies derived from the Enneagram system, empowering audiences to unlock personal transformation and cultivate healthier relationships. So Chelsie, welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself, your story, and what you do?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. The Worthy Mother podcast is a beautiful place for me to come and join and share space with other mothers who are just trying to get to know who they are truly and authentically, become more aware of themselves so that they can be the best versions of themselves for everyone, starting with themselves first, right? Because that's kind of how my journey started. I was an educator, as you said in my intro, and I kind of had only ever thought of myself as being an elementary school teacher or an elementary school principal, got my master's, did the whole thing. But I found myself sick with anxiety, stress, and just overwhelm. And through that time, I was also experiencing infertility struggles and just I couldn't get pregnant. And it was just stress, 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 stress. Finally, I get pregnant after IVF and all the things. And after my baby was born, I have postpartum depression and anxiety. And I am just again completely sick with stress. And I went to therapy, and my therapist introduced me to the concept of the Enneagram and helped me to understand some of the things I was struggling with as a person in general. Was that I have a fear of being unloved, unwanted, and unneeded. Even just talking about it right now, my heart starts to melt saying it. So I want to be loved, wanted, needed, and to be seen as loving, kind, and generous. And that makes me an Enneagram 2. And so learning that about myself and how I'm not very good at setting boundaries. I'm not very good at taking care of myself. Instead, I pour into others and ignore my needs and end up overextending myself. And then I'm super stressed and sick. So I found many places where I could set boundaries, and then eventually decided to leave teaching because that was the last place where I was really unable to set those boundaries in a healthy way, and decided to get certified in the Enneagram because it was the change agent, along with some other things too, but that was the change agent that for me, and if I could extend this knowledge to anybody else, that I'm just so passionate in allowing myself to do that in whatever way I can.
Ugh, I am a fellow too, and can relate so much to what you're saying. I also left a career in elementary teaching. And so what you just said there speaks to so much to my story as well. Like knowing and learning that, okay, as a 2, have to set those boundaries, have to learn to really protect our energy and protect what we're giving to others, because that doesn't necessarily come naturally to us. And so a
That's
big
our
point of connection there.
That's our blind spot for us too, is that we're so busy giving to others because we think that's what we need to do to deserve love. And so our journey is realizing that in general, we are love. So we don't need to be worried about giving, receiving, taking the transactions that it is, because we're so kind of give to get type people. We don't even know we are, but we're doing all these things in hopes that we'll receive something in return, whether that be love, attention, affirmation, or later on, they'll take care of you because you took care of them. And that causes so much of this like shame spirals that we can get into. We have our core emotional struggle of shame, and that mixes with this need for love and this fear of rejection. And it's no wonder why we struggle with all of the stress. And so I've just found so much more of a lightness and a connectedness. And again, I learned how I felt stuck, learned how to release, and now I live more present and connected. And that's why I am passionate about helping others with that.
Oh, I absolutely love that. So I want to just kind of start by getting clear on what the Enneagram is. Like I said, am like slightly obsessed with learning about the Enneagram, but listeners may or may not even know what the Enneagram is and what it does. So can you just explain kind of the basics of the Enneagram to us?
I'd love to do that. And can we start with, because both Emily and I had a little chat before we started, the Enneagram is not a personality test. So we're not going to say like, oh, I did it, like I did the Enneagram, because the Enneagram is actually an entire inclusive system of personality structures, right? And in order to enter into that system, some people have created tests to be a starting point to figure out what your type is, because that journey can be a difficult one and it's best made through self-discovery. So the Enneagram is a powerful self-discovery tool that purports that there are 9 different core motivations that form the lens through which we view the world. The Ennea means 9, and the gram is kind of the diagram. So if you haven't seen it, obviously you're listening here, it's a circle. And at the very top, where on a clock, it would be a 12, it's a 9, and then it goes around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Each of those 9 types has specific core desires, fears, and motivators that are forming their lens through which they view the world, which also subconsciously drives their behaviors and attitudes. And so when you learn your type, you're able to understand why you're doing what you're doing, which is such a powerful way to stop, contemplate, and have curiosity and then self-acceptance around those behaviors and attitudes, and kind of shine a light on some of those spots of yourself that you've always wanted to shift and change, but didn't quite know how or where to go with that.
Yeah, I love that piece there. It's so key to understanding the Enneagram as a tool that it can help understand your personality and your behaviors and what you do, but really knowing that it's looking so much deeper at kind of what drives you in the world and what you are, drawn to doing naturally and what you are kind of fearful of, and how that really does motivate so much of what we do. So I love the way you explained that. I think it's such a concise and like, okay, that makes sense, right? If this is something that we thought was a personality test, okay, yes, it has something to do with the way we show up in the world, but it's a little bit deeper and a little bit different than that.
And that's why it's hard to find your type, because it's more about those subconscious drivers. And that's kind of the first step, is to start bringing some of those subconscious drivers to the forefront so that you can be more decisive or contemplative about, do I want this to continue driving me? Because the point of the Enneagram isn't, oh, these are my core motivators, so I'm going to do more of that. It is, these are my core motivators. This is why I'm stuck. So I need to learn how to release myself from these fears and desires that are holding me in my place here. And the nice thing about the Enneagram is it has a very clear tool to do that, because there's 2 lines from your type, because the types are interconnected. So again, you have the circle, the 9 types around, and then there's a bunch of little lines in between. And those lines mean something. The system is interconnected in that for me and you as type 2s, we have lines or resource points that help us to kind of either integrate into the healthier versions of ourselves, or that we can kind of lean into and stress, and we disintegrate into the unhealthier spaces of us too. So we just kind of brought up another subject with the Enneagram, is the levels of development, which again gives so much clarity and voice to how you can use this as a self-growth tool, because so many other personality systems are just like, this is how you act. okay, so what do I do about that? And the Enneagram gives us the guidance and support to use these tools. And that's why I have a job as a coach, is to help bring these tools to the table so that people can understand and utilize them in their everyday life.
Yeah, I would love to kind of get into that a little bit more about how it really is a valuable tool, right? When it comes to how we can understand ourselves and how we can focus on growth and focus on living that better life that you talked about, right? Like being more present, being more connected, being able to know the best approach for kind of self-healing and things like that. And I'd love to know how, as a coach, you work with your clients and use it as a tool for all
Yeah,
of that.
absolutely. Well, and I love that you're a two, because like we can connect so closely, and I'm sure that I know most twos I know are pretty open book people and sharing.
Mhm.
They share more about themselves so that others can, get to know them and be connected with them. So I'm sure it'll be open a little bit here. So maybe we can do a little bit of coaching in the moment if you're open. But
Yeah, super open.
yeah, the first thing I do is I'm specialized in connecting people with their core types. So again, instead of just taking a free test, I meet with people to help them to learn why they are the type they are and feel that with confidence and clarity. Once we've gotten there, then you can use the tool, right? And for some people, that's quite the journey. It's several years, it's mistyping, it's this and that, but that's okay. You're still learning about yourself and the other types as you're doing that. So let's normalize not getting your type right the first time. That can happen. But once we know their type, then I try to teach them about the core emotional struggle of each of the 9 types, because that's kind of where a lot of people have blind spots and it can really open up their eyes to things. So for us, the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the centers of intelligence. So welcome to the podcast. We're really getting through all of the things here in the Enneagram. So the Enneagram also has 3 centers of intelligence, and that's the head center, where you do your analytical thinking, the heart center, where you do your feeling, emotions, and dreaming, and then the gut or body center, and that's where you have your gut feelings, and then also just like the actions that you take in things in life. And so we all have all 3, but one of them is our kind of dominant, or like can overtake things from time to time for us. But the point is to kind of balance them all, utilize them all, and be aware of them all. So at the end of a typing session, I always teach people a little bit about their core emotional struggle that's connected with their center. So for us as twos, our core emotional is with shame. So this feeling of unworthiness, this feeling of I'm uncomfortable here, this feeling of "Ooh, I don't fit in here," or I feel a little weird, or I feel like I need to be secretive about things. So there's all these different things that I show my clients. And then I'm like, do you see yourself feeling this from time to time? And they're just like, okay, well, what? And then so we say, I feel unworthy because, and we take a look back at those core desires and fears. I feel unworthy because I'm feeling rejected here and people aren't taking my help. And that feels awful. So I'm feeling unworthy. It's not true. It's just my core fear is telling me that. So I can go do a little self-talk, self-coaching, and self-love in that moment, because to get to a healthier, connected place, you need to do that internally through processing and giving yourself compassion and self-love. But if you've never done it before, it's really hard. So it's kind of the way I do it. So when I'm bringing about shame, the word shame, what does that mean to you, Emily? Like, what are you thinking about, or do you have a connection with that word of shame?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's start by saying that one of the biggest themes of this podcast is talking about the shame that we feel, and
Ooh.
that kind of spirals us, right? And I have said before on this podcast that growing up, I think about my life, and I felt a lot of shame about a lot of things growing up that I don't think was necessarily put on me by other people, making me feel shameful.
Mm-hmm. That's very true, because
yeah.
we already have shame within us. That's what we have. And so we take what other people do and we process that emotionally through our shame, through our filters of our fears and desires. And it comes back out as like, you shamed me, but really we felt shamed. And it comes just in the smallest thing. So one of the things that comes from shame is over apologizing. So tell me about your as a 2, I know you do it. I don't even have to wonder. So tell me about your need to apologize for just existing in life.
Yeah. I mean, again, that is something growing up, and until pretty recently on my own like self-discovery journey and really understanding that I do go to shame a lot, feeling like I wasn't even allowed to have an opinion on things because it connects to that shame and that feeling like the need to apologize for just having an opinion. Well, it's easier if I just don't have an opinion, if I don't share my opinion. So definitely that resonates.
I feel like we also apologize for things as twos from kind of a blind spot as well. So I'd love to highlight that for anyone else who is a two, but anyone else who kind of has this need to over apologize, because it's not just twos.
Yeah.
But, let's say I show up late to something and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize. Like it was this, it was that. I feel the need to over explain and apologize for myself. And that's all shame coming out. But what I'm also doing is like making it so the other person has to tell me, oh, you're okay, you're fine, I don't mind. And I'm getting the love, attention, and affirmation that I'm seeking because they're placating me. So I'm taking the spotlight instead of apologizing genuinely and actually making them kind of tell me I'm okay. So it's like this roundabout way of me getting information I'm seeking. And so when I saw that part of it, I'm like, listen, what can I do instead? So it's always creating a statement of gratitude. So thank you so much for your grace for me. I really appreciate that, instead of, oh my gosh, it was this and that, over explain. Right. And so coming from a place of gratitude, and also then they might be like, oh yeah, no problem still, but they're not feeling like, okay, why are we still talking about this thing? And why am I still giving you continued, affirmation? We're still talking about how you were late. Like, can we move on? Kind of a thing. So I don't know if any of that's resonating, or if you've practiced any of those that's the thing is with the Enneagram is like little teeny tiny small shifts, noticing small incremental changes over time develop into this inner witness that's like a beautiful place for you to explore rather than a shame-filled spiral.
I love that. I love that approach. I'm going to have to kind of bring that to my consciousness as an approach to that, because that is something that, as a two, and I think as a woman, we tend to also just societally over apologize. I think that's probably something that we can all tap into, that kind of shift, but definitely something that I think can be a good conscious tool for me. Life.
And noticing, and of course not judging ourselves if we note ourselves, oh, there I am, I'm doing the apologizing thing, but we know it's stemming from our shame, and then just stopping, like if we notice that, oh, I did it, oh, that's okay. Of course I'm going to. It's a habit. It's a reaction. And for us twos, because we're heart types and we're repressed in our head center because we're dependent stance types. Again, this is all getting very deep, but like we feel and then we do. So we don't stop to think about things. And so to balance our centers of intelligence means I need to feel, think, and then do. And so the more I can guide that thinking part of things, not towards the attitude of unhealthy shame, I'm unworthy, I don't belong here, I need to figure out a way to be important here, instead of all of those like monologues that we have internally, we can shift it to the healthier monologues of, I am worthy, I don't need to do anymore, I can come from a place of altruism, and if I don't have the mental, physical, and emotional energy to expend today, I'm not going to, and I'm going to put a boundary there. And just being more in that space in your internal monologue is going to help you be more present and connected, because you're not coming from this like deficit mindset of being unworthy, right?
Yeah, no, I think that is a really powerful way to look at it. I'm wondering if you can, without, I don't think getting into the 9 types in detail is going to be super helpful on a podcast episode. It's something that I think anyone who's listening, if you're interested in learning more about the 9 types specifically and really digging in, there are so many amazing resources. And I know you have some resources as well, but we are talking a lot about the 2. And I'm wondering if you can kind of help us see, if this is new to someone, maybe some other areas, a couple other examples of how this might come up for people who are different numbers, just so we can kind of see a more full picture.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you kind of expanding out the view a little bit, because we are focused on the 2s because we're both 2s, so we can resonate with it. But I feel like what's good about this is you can see how deep you can take the work, and how it's so much more than just a little personality test with a little printout. Like there is so much to do, and that is just the tip of the iceberg with the 2. And I could go in depth with each of the 9 types as much as I did to talk about the journey and what they need to pay attention to with each of the 9 types. So yeah, I mean, it would be just me sitting here in a monologue, but I will go over kind of the name of each of the types and what they're desiring. There is kind of a nickname because just saying type 1, type 2, type 3 is depersonalizing to some people. And it's really hard to remember at first, like which one is which. And so the names kind of help us have a story to go along with the number and help us to kind of go, oh, that's that one, right? And when you enter the system, there's going to be a lot of stereotyping. There's going to be a lot of, oh, I think I know my mom is this type and my dad is this type and my sister is this type. That's what the tool is for to a degree, but it's also to put a mirror up to yourself to say like, but which one of these am I? And to get to know yourself better. And a big faux pas in the Enneagram world is to tell someone else what type you think they are, because there's a lot of negative traits with the types that can be seen as negative. And so then they might kind of be turned off to it if you do that. So just a little bit of ahead of time there. These names also, like if you hear it and you're like, oh, I call myself a perfectionist, so I must be that type. That's not true either, because it's so much more in depth, as you can see from our conversation, to really kind of get in the weeds of figuring out what your type is. But I digress. So starting with the type 9, they're at the very top of the circle there. The type 9 is called the peaceful mediator. They have a fear of conflict. They're not the only type that has a fear of conflict. They mostly have this fear of separation due to conflict. And then they have a desire to be at ease and peaceful and to have this inner serenity kind of thing. So they're trying to find that inner peace and serenity. And that's what they're going to lean into. So they're going to do things and not do things due to that fear and desire. That's a 9. And then the 1s are called the moral perfectionists. So they desire to be good and right. And they're kind of your rule followers. There's other types that are rule followers too, but they really lean on those rules as guidelines and moral guidelines to support them in doing the best they can, excelling at everything they can do, and be beyond criticism, because they don't want to be seen as bad. Okay, so that's the 9 and the 1. Do you want to stop and chat about anything before we keep going?
Well, I think there's something you're saying in there with each of the types. It's like, just because you might be avoidant of conflict does not mean you are a 9. And just because you are a rule follower does not mean you are a 1. And I think it's a really important, those are kind of the keys to those types, right? But it's not, there's a lot more in there, right? And obviously,
let's talk about it there, because people be like, why? Because I don't like conflict, so I'm a 9, right? I heard you say that. Well, listen, we're 2s. We don't like conflict. Why? Because we're afraid of being rejected, and that's our fear, right? 1s might not like conflict because it's not the good or right thing to get into a conflict for someone. 9s don't like it because they don't want to feel separated, and because just in general, conflict for them is uncomfortable and they want to stay comfortable. 6s don't like conflict because they have this like they're called the loyal skeptic. And they're a dependent stance type, and they want to be able to check in with others and to know that they're doing okay. And so they're kind of this need to find certitude and reassurance. And so if there's not someone there to go to find certitude and reassurance, that's really uncomfortable for them. They have a fear of being completely on their own emotionally and physically. So they're not going to get into a conflict sometimes because of that. So we could go through each one, and that why behind it is what makes you your Enneagram type, which then again, you can't see that. We can do the same things in the room. Our actions, same. Like you and I can come into a meeting and we're sitting there, we're smiling. We're not really saying anything, but you and I are just sitting there in the room. Our behavior is the same. And then another person, all of us are doing the same thing, right? But the inner thought process that's going on and coming into the meeting, everybody has a different thought process of, I'm going to get my needs met here by doing this thing, by, sharing my opinions, by laying low, by whatever. So the inner attitude is different. But then even behind that inner attitude is the motivator. And that motivator is so far back there, you're not going to maybe know what someone else's motivations are, but you can see how having a tool like the Enneagram could be very helpful in those settings, so that you can stop taking things as personally when people come at the table and they're very different from you.
Yeah. It's like you almost have to take it that step further of like, okay, this is happening now, why? And then you get the answer there. I mean, you kind of said that. It's like 100%. That's the answer, is the why are you doing the things? Why are you avoiding the conflict? It's really, the way you explain that is super helpful.
And that's what I do in a typing session, right? And because there's 9 whole types, other than the first 3 that we've talked about, or the first, so we did 9, 1, 2, then the 3 is a successful achiever. They want to be successful and achieve things in order to be seen as a role model. The 4 is the romantic individualist. The 5 is the thoughtful observer. The 6 is the loyal skeptic. The 7 is the enthusiastic optimist. And the 8 is the protective challenger. And so you can hear those different, like you can already hear within those titles, like, oh, I think I know someone like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's behind that so many things to look into. And people also get confused, and I'm sure you've come up across this too. They're like, okay, so there's only 9 types of people in the world. Are you serious? Like, that's not even real, But as you uncover things and you realize it, don't you say all the time, oh, you remind me of my aunt. You're just like her. Or you're just like my friend so-and-so. Guess what? They're probably the same type. And amongst the 9 types, there's 9 levels of development that each of the persons could be showing up as that day. And maybe they're in stress and they're showing up more in stress that day. So their behaviors are different. The behaviors and attitudes are one thing, but the why behind it is another thing. And so that's why it's hard to type other people unless you know the whole system with like a really, complete lens, if you will. And there's even more to it. There's subtypes. So there's actually 27 types. Like, we can keep going to show that there's a lot of variance and a lot of intricacies to the system to explore. And just that alone, like, there's so many people out in the world that are feeling lost, that are feeling stuck, that are feeling like they need a place to put their energy, their anxious energy, or their shame, or their anger. And learning about your personality structure and what is going on with that is a great and healthy place to put all of that energy that you're kind of spinning around with, and to be curious and contemplative with.
Yeah, something we were talking about right before we hit record is just how sometimes having the language to explain things and to really like get in and learn about ourselves in a way that like we can more tangibly talk about, right? It's something that we can have a conversation with this common language and really understand. It can be so helpful. And so knowing that it's not like something, again, it's not assigning a personality to someone. It's really just language that we can understand how we all function as human beings that are complex and that tap into all of these different areas. And we just have our more dominant type, right, that we pull from, and that kind of why links to, but knowing that, yes, this is existing as a human, all of these 9 types explain that humanity. And so really understanding that and knowing that it is a tool, it is a really powerful tool for self-awareness and connection and just like knowing how we are as humans.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I want to piggyback on that for sure, because it's like, many people are like, oh, I don't want to be put in a box by a personality system. And what you've probably heard many times if you're into the Enneagram is that you're already in a box. You are living within a box already. Those fears and desires are keeping you stuck and sheltered in place. And how is that working for you? Like, in most general senses, you're probably in those average levels, and you're over identified with your ego, which comes in in the healthy levels. And then you just get over identified and move down the levels of development till you're really stuck in the levels of interpersonal control, and you're butting heads with people, and you're just trying to get your needs met, and you're spinning your wheels. And so the idea of the Enneagram is to just, again, shine a light on and see, oh my gosh, that's in the box, and I don't want to stay in this box. That's not serving me. I need to get back into the driver's seat and get these core motivators out of the seat and decide whether or not I'm going to let that drive me. And when you start doing that and empower yourself to believe that you can, it switches something within you, and it like wakes you up to yourself, and you just become more curious. And so as soon as I give someone like, a little bit about their type and they can just start learning about it, they're like, what do I do? And I'm like, you're going to be doing it. Like, after you leave this session, you're going to be doing it. You're going to be listening to your inner witness and wondering, why did I do that? Is it one of my core motivators? And just that alone is a much different life than living automatically.
Yes. Self-awareness is like just a huge, I want to say, value that I have. Helping others really understand that, like, understanding ourselves and being open to understanding ourselves. It is absolutely key.
Yeah, because the other conversation that comes up a lot with me is like, oh, okay, so what are the best types to be in a relationship together or whatever? And what I always say is, 2 people who are self-aware and willing to look at their blind spots, their stress paths, and willing to believe these things about themselves that other people have been trying to tell them their whole lives, and to just accept give compassion to themselves and others and hold space while other people figure that out, because they might do it on a different timeline, and that's okay. We're all here to figure out how to get to this quote unquote highest level of development, to find our true essence, to, when we're on this journey, it's releasing ourselves from these fears and desires and living in our true essence. That is a beautiful idea. And for some people, it's like, that's funny. That's woo-woo crap right there. I'm here to tell you it's really not. It's a lot more scientific than you would think. There's a book called The Neuroscience of the Enneagram, and it proves that where your attitude is going, where your attention is flowing, your energy is going. So if you're focused on these negative things outside of your sphere of control, you're going to feel out of control. So the more awareness you can bring to yourself and stop pointing fingers at others, the healthier and more connected you're going to feel. And that's all the Enneagram does, is it just gives you those tools to do so. I mean, you can definitely look at compatibility between types and say like some types might be more compatible or more oftenly like you see them together. But that doesn't mean that there's any two types together that couldn't have a successful relationship if they're willing to have the self-awareness it takes to come to this world and express their emotions clearly, control their anxious thoughts, and take some action on some things, which is your head, your heart, and your body centers, right?
Yeah. I would love to talk a little bit more about how an understanding of the Enneagram, specifically talking to mothers, right?
Mm-hmm.
How if we know our own types and we are self-aware in that way, and then maybe also have an understanding of others in our lives that we are communicating regularly with, how that can be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to love about the Enneagram, but our personality affects literally everything in our lives. The work we do, the relationships we're in, the way we show up for people, and just the choices we make, like it's all there. So as a mother, I can tell you that it has greatly impacted my ability to show up for my kids as my quote unquote best self. And that's not just some term I'm using, literally the best I've ever been, right? Because I know myself so well. And a big question in the Enneagram world is like, when do you become your type? So I've taken a stance on it. Everybody can have their own ideas. But like we've talked about, it's coming from those core desires. So I'm not going to go to my infant child and say, what are your core desires and fears and motivators? And they're going to be like, well, mom, I'd like to be loved and wanted, right? And like truly at our true essence, we're released from these fears and desires. And so not until we start having fears come in, do they really start to show up. So when do you become your type? My personal belief, you're born your type. And then that lens gets reinforced through you trying to get your needs met. So that's what I choose to believe. You believe what you want to believe. But as a mother, knowing about myself that I have this need to be loved and wanted, I don't want to put my emotional needs on my children. And that's what happened to me. My mother's emotional needs as a 2 got put onto me. And that's a lot of a burden to bear for a child. So my self-awareness helps my kids in that way, that I'm more aware of my emotional struggles and don't look to them to give me that love, attention, affirmation I'm seeking in an unhealthy way, in a more balanced way, right? Like I'm still loving on them 100%. But then as a mom, like I'm like curious about, okay, who are you? Like, what are you going to be? And which type are you going to be? And again, we can't know for sure until later. But how can I make sure I'm coming at this from a holistic perspective of, again, I'm not trying to make them a type, but knowing there are these 9 types and reinforcing in them some of these messages that kind of got lost in childhood, because those are all in the Enneagram too, of like, for us twos, it's like, it's not okay to have needs. I'm good and okay if everyone around me is loving me, and that it's processed in this way that like, if I do things for others, then I'm going to get that love and attention and affirmation. So like, that's just rolling around in there. So knowing what all those patterns are helps me to make sure that I'm supporting my children in really like developing them on this more true essence level than their personality. They're going to have a personality. So like, just, I don't know, balancing all of that. And then my husband is a 9. So that peaceful mediator that we talked about, and knowing his type was literally integral to our marriage being as good as it is now. So say, do you know what type your partner is?
He is like a hardcore 7.
Hardcore 7. Oh, so fun. 2s and 7s are like so good together, both positive thinking, both action oriented, both, up for a good time, that kind of a thing. But I'm sure there's a lot of things there with your emotions that
the emotions is a huge because the sevens, it's really a lot about avoiding pain and, enjoying things, and avoiding pain is something that it comes up a lot, not wanting to deal with the emotions, because if we just don't deal with them, then we don't have to deal with them.
So their
And
head
for
types.
me, yes.
Yeah.
For me, I'm like, let's get into it.
Yes, which is why you're a great couple, right? Because it's necessary to have both. Their head types, so they're constantly thinking and planning, and they stay in their head, they rationalize things, they're going a million miles an hour up there and with what's next, right? And
Mhm.
they have a fear of emotional pain. I guess pain in general, but just also just like being bored, and it like gives them
Yeah.
emotional pain to be bored. And so they're constantly looking for the next thing that's going to stimulate them. And if you're not that thing, and you're a 2 and you want to be loved, wanted, and needed, and they're on the next thing, you're like, but I want to be part of that, there's just a lot of ways that you can feel rejected by someone as a 2. And so knowing, oh, that's his thing to like work on, right? That's his
Mhm.
thing to figure out. I now have a little clarity and a peek inside of his brain and understanding where he's coming from, which gives me the chance to give him a lot of empathy, understanding, and some language to express myself to him, to let him know, like, hey, this thing you do is really hard for me. And I'm working on accepting it, right? I'm working on accepting it, but I also need to hear from you, like, what are you working on around your self-awareness in this arena, right? And that's where a lot of the stuckness gets with couples, is one of them wants to really get into the Enneagram and the other one's like, that's BS. I don't have time for that, kind of a thing. So it can be hard. My husband leaned in a little bit, but definitely not quite as, he didn't take a right turn like I did, like right down to Enneagram lane,
It really is powerful how, when we can understand that others have, like, there's a core motivator behind every single person in our lives. That boss that you had that was really difficult to work with. And anyone who just comes across like, oh my goodness, they are so incredible, so amazing, and their energy, just, I'm so drawn to it, knowing like they have a core motivation that maybe they've really healed and like integrated different parts of themselves. And we all, I think just knowing that and having the compassion for others and for ourselves, to not compare ourselves to others, right?
Oh yeah.
It's so powerful. And as someone who, like, I really appreciate research and like things being really concrete in a way, because it helps me understand things. The Enneagram has become a way of looking at myself and others that I can understand it, while also not putting people in a box, also not trying to force things. It's like, I just know that whether I know what type someone else is or not, I know that there's a lot going on under the surface, because I understand how complex we are through the lens of the Enneagram.
1,000%. So then you don't have to take things as personally, right? Which us
Mhm.
2s love to do. We love to be
Oh yeah.
way more interested in other people's opinions of us, even though we have no control over what they're thinking and feeling. We love to think that we do, right? And like what I like to say to people in those moments is, as true and real as your lens is to you, that person is to them. So as difficult as it is to put aside other people's needs for a 2 and to really focus on myself and to be, introspective and to take time to give myself love and compassion that I am seeking, that's hard for other people. They're like, what are you talking about? I don't no, that's so hard for us. We feel selfish. We feel unworthy. We feel like we should be doing something else for someone else. Cause how are we, like, it sends us into an anxious shame spiral. And so to be able to take that power back to ourselves and go into that place internally, in that attitude, and go to the more positive attitude, it's hard. But guess what? That is just as hard for another type, like the type 4, who wants to be seen and loved for who they are authentically, but they don't feel they've ever found their authentic self. So then they're constantly searching for it, and nobody can understand me, and nobody's going to understand me, and I feel flawed, but don't tell me I'm flawed. And so then they're coming from their flawed, hurt place. And then I'm like, oh, I get it. Okay, so as true and real as my lens is to me, yours is
Mhm.
to you. And you're going to work on that, and I have to focus on myself. And that's why I'm saying it's fun and interesting to look around at the Enneagram, learn about all the types, get to know them. It's just fascinating. But also it's to send this mirror onto myself. And because us 2s are so others focused, guess what's the last type we're going to learn about? Do you find yourself when you're reading about the two just completely like, what did I just read? Like you can't
Yeah.
even like spend the time to read about twos. Yeah, super fun. Like how we just are literally like, what? No, but what about this person? Or I'm going to read this so I can send it to this person. It's like, no, do it for yourself only and really focus that attention, energy, and affection that you have for others onto yourself.
Yeah, I love that. How would you recommend for someone who's interested in kind of starting this journey to learn about themselves through the Enneagram? Where would you recommend they start?
So, of course, I'm going to recommend my services because,
Mhm.
yes, I own my own business. And I just think that if you really are interested by hearing this podcast and you're like, wow, I really want to know that, getting your core type figured out from the beginning, in depth, knowing it really well, and having a little bit of guidance and resources put together for you. That's what I do with my typing sessions. And so it's just a great way to do it, right? And it's $100. It's not the end of the world, that kind of a thing. So if people want to do a typing session with me, great. There's tons of other amazing coaches out there to do typing sessions with. Yes, there are a lot of free tests. So the caveat with the free tests is they're focused on those attributes like I don't like conflict, like I have a lot of anxiety, like I like for other people to tell me they love me or something. Well, all types want those things, right? So do it with a little bit of skepticism and openness to if it spits out a type at you, let me look into this and really use it as a tool to kind of be a starting point for
Mhm.
self-discovery. Listen to a lot of podcasts out there that are going to help you. Like there's podcasts that have panels of people talking from their perspective and their type. And so listening to those podcasts called the narrative tradition of the Enneagram, where they're telling you from their lived experience and you're going to go, wait a minute, that sounds a lot like my thought process. That's probably your type. Or if you read it and you're like, oh man, that hurts. I am too much like that one. Oh shoot. That's probably your type too, right? Like where you're just like, oh man, that just called me out on some of my BS that I've been trying to hide from people, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's tons of great websites. I'm sure you'll link some things in there, like just the self-discovery aspect. There's tons of amazing books out there, so many resources that are low cost, but it can be really overwhelming because there's also a lot of resources. So take your time with yourself and just, don't get stuck in the first type you kind of wonder about and really contemplate when you kind of figure out which one you think you are, start walking through life going, ooh, did I just do that because, and then connect it back to a core motivator. And if that's feeling true and connected, then you found your type.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think it's a good thing to know going into it that there's a lot more to it than just the things that you do, the behaviors you have. Obviously we've talked about that a lot in this conversation, but knowing that for any of us, for if you just go take a test, it will give you a type based on the behaviors and those feelings you might have that might have something behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to know that. And I think approaching it with that lens, you'll get such a better start to the process rather than
Absolutely.
calling yourself a 6 when really you were a 9 full time or whatever it is.
Yeah. And honestly, like if you're in a really stressed out place in life right now, it might be really, really hard for you to find your core type
Mhm.
because you might be living in your stress response. And so you're not really like identifying with your home core type. Again, as an Enneagram expert, I will listen to you and be like, but is that always? Or
Mhm.
maybe you've been on a growth journey for a while and you've really negated some of these negative attributes of the type because you're growing. That's a beautiful thing too. But guess what? You probably will take a test and not answer those attributes, even though at one point in time they were true, which is why the attribute part of the test is not right. People are probably thinking, well, why don't they focus on the core motivators? Because these are subconscious and there's also a lot of them. And so it's a over cumbersome thing. So like, yeah, just pop onto, I have a blog with the 9 types in it, read through them, resonate with which few kind of seem to, I do have a test as well, but mine's more kind of like you have to write some answers in, you have to kind of think through things. It's not just based on attributes, it's an attribute portion, but that's why there's no one great tool that science has said that's it. Because
Mhm.
as human beings, we are so nuanced and our experiences are vast and there's a vast array of them and all of them can be explained in your Enneagram type, but it doesn't help you find your type quickly and easily. So if you're willing to do the work to figure it out, you will have a great outcome from it. And you're going to learn about the other types as you go, which is also an interesting kind of fun place to put your energy. And you're like, I don't have time for all of this. Well, I would argue to say It's a very important thing to spend your time on, because otherwise you're going to spend your time spinning your wheels and staying stuck. So if you're looking for kind of something that's going to guide you, support you, and what do I do for growth? That's literally like, it's all there for you for the taking if you should choose to engage with it. And it's not like a woo woo, like there is like a spiritual component to the Enneagram, with the idea that you're getting connected to your true essence. Sometimes it gets taken down like religious aspects from some creators, but that's not like, it is a spiritual practice, not a religious practice, if you will.
Yeah, totally. So Chelsie, well, first of all, this conversation about the Enneagram has been like life-giving. I am so just really obsessed with talking about it. I think it's so much fun. There's endless learning to be done. So I so appreciate you being here and just having this conversation with us. Something that I really love to ask guests towards the end of the episode is more personal about you and your life as a mother, and getting to know a little bit about how you take care of yourself, because I think self-care is something we can all work on normalizing more in our lives as moms, and especially as an Enneagram type 2. That's probably a really important part of your growth journey, is putting yourself first. So I would just love to know how you take care of yourself, what self-care looks like in your life, and if you have any tips for moms to make sure that they are caring for themselves as well.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, like you hit the nail on the head. It's literally for all twos. The first thing is self-care and self-love. And I think that was kind of where it started for me, was to just like notice how much not love I was giving myself and make that internal switch. That's not really self-care, but like whilst doing the self-care things, telling myself that I am worthy of the time I'm spending on myself, and releasing myself and being disinterested in any like guilty or shameful feelings I have on spending time and money and energy on things that are just for me. I think we get caught in traps of like, oh, I'm going to do self-care, but it's like actually going to kind of benefit other people too or something. And so honestly, I love a really good facial. I have an amazing woman who just like gives me an entire experience during my facial. And for me, there's a lot of shame I carry around my skin and like not being confident with it because I have acne. And so just really spending some time on something that's like a piece of me that usually I would ignore. And then I have someone to hold me accountable to my face routines, which is not self-care. It's just actually doing what you need to do, like live basically. So facials, I love getting massages. I'm a gym member and I love going into the sauna and just like sitting in the sauna, closing my eyes, reading a book, listening to some music. I'm getting more into like meditative practices, Reiki, breath work. I could keep going, because that's literally the journey of a 2, is like, what are you going to do for self-care? So I'm just like, let me go through all the things and see what really lands with me, fulfills me, and gives me that love that I'm looking for, so that I can be love for myself and others, instead of being in a stuck place where I'm resentful of others because I never get my needs met. So learning what my needs are and freaking doing it. So if that's like, right now, I really need a hug, I'm going to go to my husband and I'm going to ask for a hug, instead of me being like, he's never hugging me. Just like totally going down that route. So probably a longer answer than what you were looking for. There's my shame right there, by the way. But like, honestly, that is a really proud thing for me, because I used to just probably be like, I like to talk to my friends on the phone or something. And I really don't know, but it's been a focus of my journey and I'm better because of it. And I would just say for anybody, if you're looking out and seeing someone else do something in their self-care life and you're like jealous of it, just make time and space for you to do that. Set aside. And I know that monetarily, some of these things are not always accessible. Do something to make it as accessible as possible. Ask for it for a gift. Do whatever you can so that you can experience those things, because you deserve it. And again, you'll show up a better person for yourself and others when you're really enriching yourself with that self-love. But if you don't have time to do a lot, taking a moment to really give yourself those compliments and self-love from the inside is going to be the key to being healthier and connected for any of the 9 types.
I love that answer. Not at all longer than what I'd hoped for.
See?
There's that validation.
Now you have to give me an affirmation. See, I did it.
I know what you need now.
Thank you.
But I love looking at self-care as the meeting of our needs. That's something that for me, that's really how I personally define it. And maybe that comes from the understanding I have of self-care as a 2. There's kind of some awareness that's being brought forward for me based on that answer. But there's so much in there that I find so valuable. I think we can really normalize the fact that like we are allowed to, we're not just allowed to, we are worthy of getting our needs met and of focusing on that for ourselves. Like it doesn't have to always come from someone else. We can actually look inside and get our needs met, whether that's going and getting a facial. And it sounds like that's not just a facial, there's a lot underneath why that is what you're choosing. And it could be that, but it can also be anything else that meets a need, whether it's it could be a physical need or just something that like sounds nice, sounds relaxing.
Let's go back to those 3 centers of intelligence, because honestly, like this is for everybody. But keep a pulse on your mental, physical, and emotional energy. If one of those tanks is getting drained, there's a need that needs to be fulfilled. And so for us twos, we'll tell ourselves we don't deserve a break. We haven't done enough yet. There's other types that will think other things, right? But like my emotional energy is so drained. I can feel it. I don't have any patience left. I don't have that space for my kids to have their big moments of anger and whatever. And so I am going to like let myself know. My husband and I have this, it's from Brene Brown, where it's like, we just say what number we're at. And we're like, oh, I'm at like a 20 right now. And if he's like, also, I'm at a 20, we have this family gap plan because we're not at 100% yet. So it's like, get out the tablets, get out the snacks, get out whatever we need to just for the next hour, not be having to deal with all of the emotional needs that are happening because I don't have the capacity. And that is okay, because guess what? I'm a human being and I'm allowed to not have the emotional capacity today too. That's not a good or bad thing. It doesn't make me a bad mom because today I'm dealing with more emotions. And so just even giving myself the permission to literally stop the presses. I'm not going to keep making dinner. Are you kidding me? I'm freaking tired. I have a headache. Get the chicken nuggets out. Order like whatever, get a leftover out, throw them some crackers. I don't care. But we're going to put on something on YouTube and you're going to watch it. And I'm going to give myself the permission to maybe just go upstairs and be quiet for a little bit so that I can come back down and love on you and do nighttime, bedtime without this chaos of me feeling really drained. And I feel like if we would just stop and notice those mental, physical, and emotional needs, let our partner have those mental, physical, and emotional needs, give each other a break in those moments, and just have that family gap plan. That right there is like more than anything that self-care can do for us. Cause we're like, in the moment, I'm going to care for myself. I'm not going to go away and get a facial. I'm going to say right now, I don't have the emotional capacity to be present for you and hold space for your emotions. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to have them, but I can't. Like, this is too much for me right now.
Yeah. There is so much that I could say about that. Like I could probably do a full episode just responding to you saying that. But I think what I want to do is just say, I appreciate you sharing that because it is so important that we normalize being humans in motherhood. Like we're humans. Our children are also human. Like they also will be at capacity at times in their life and not be able to deal with things. It's just how it is. And we get this kind of perception sometimes that we're not allowed to be human. We're not allowed to reach our capacity because we're moms and we have to show up for everyone and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's not how it works. Obviously, like if you are taking care of yourself and doing things for you, you will have more capacity than if you're not. But we are all human beings living in this world that we live in, and we need a break, like a lot. We need a lot of breaks. That's totally normal, totally okay.
That family gap plan happens a lot around here, and we don't feel bad about it because then like they need to, like, it's been an integral tool for self-care for both my husband and I. And some days I'm like, hey babe, I'm like at 85, 90, like I'm good. You go upstairs, you just rest. Like I got this on lock. We're going to do fun activities. Like I'm going to be like park mom right now, or like Pinterest mom or something. And those are some days. And some days I'm like, oh, I can't. And he's like, I got this. I'm making dinner. You go upstairs, you get in the bathtub, whatever. And we just got each other, but it's not transactional. It's literally like as the day flows. And the more you build that kind of relationship with that partner, that you see like they got you, you got them. And if you're both not there, that's fine. And we're not going to be mad at our partner because they can't show up for us in that moment, which is something I kind of, like, they're like, well, I'm always doing XYZ. And like, no, don't do that, So anyway,
not helpful.
I agree. We probably could do a whole nother podcast on it. So it's just been a lovely, amazing, beautiful, connected conversation with you.
Yes.
Just so appreciate you having a space for moms to come and listen to and be a community with each other as we are just trying to figure out this crazy thing of motherhood, right?
Yes. Chelsie, I would love for you to just quickly let us know where we can find you. I know you have a lot of resources and ways to work with you. So you can
Yeah,
just give it to us.
I'm mostly active on Instagram, and I'm at Elite Enneagram Coach. And then my website's eliteenneagramcoaching.com. Got a blog on there. There's tons of different ways you can work with me as well if you're interested in kind of starting the journey. And also, I do workshops and speaking engagements. So if you have a group of people you really want to learn the dynamics of the Enneagram, get in touch with me. I'd love to help you navigate all of that.
Love it. Thank you so much for being here. I have a feeling we will have many more conversations about the Enneagram in the future.
I think so too.
And I just so appreciate you bringing it to the Worthy Mother podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you have just really taken something from this episode, whether you are someone who knows about the Enneagram or not, that maybe this could be a jumping off point for your own journey of self-awareness with this tool. So thanks for tuning in. You are worthy, Mama.